The ground is still warm from burning huts as a woman runs barefoot across the stubble. In her arms, a child pressed tight to her chest. Behind her, the night echoes with screams and the flutter of black sails rising from the river. She doesn't look back. She already knows, her husband lies among the fallen, her home collapsing into fire. Every step forward feels like running into a fog with only one name: slavery. The chronicles of 9th century Europe return to this picture with chilling regularity. The Annals of Ulster for the year 821 state bluntly, the women were taken by force. 60 years later, the Annals of Fulda repeat the same line, the women were dragged away like cattle. One Irish scribe even added a note in the margin, a woman known only as the widow of Flann taken with her children, her fate never recorded again. And this is where the silence deepens. In some Arab accounts, children were sometimes sold separately from their mothers, infants pulled from arms and listed as cheaper stock. It's a detail most chronicles left unsaid, but the markets remembered. For a woman, captivity meant not just chains, but the tearing away of her bloodline. For the Vikings, women were never accidents of war. They were the prize. The sword brought men a quick end. For women, captivity stretched into years of humiliation. Think of the wives who stood on those smoking fields. Around them, the bodies of their kin. Behind them, the cries of children too young to understand. On their wrists, the cold bite of iron shackles. In that instant, their fate was sealed. They were no longer wives. No longer mothers. No longer daughters. They were prey. Some sagas hint at an even crueler twist. Captive women, especially those of noble birth, could be forced into a chieftain's hall as brutnies, living ornaments of status. They were neither free wives nor servants, but hostages displayed at feasts, proof that the Jarl had bent another family to his will. To sit in that hall was not an honor. It was humiliation written into ritual. Not silver. Not cattle. Women. They were the weapon that broke whole communities. And that is the story we tell today. Not the heroism of sagas. Not the romance of storm-tossed voyages. But the silence of women whose names rarely survived ink and parchment. Women who found themselves on the far side of the black sails. Cinema has taught us to see Vikings as fearless sailors, men of honor who raised toasts to beauty and bravery. The chronicles strip that illusion bare. In Norse culture, an enemy's woman was not a guest to be courted, she was plunder, tallied beside cattle, silver, and gold. The Battle of Maldon in 991 leaves no ambiguity. An Anglo-Saxon scribe wrote it plain, our wives will fall into the hands of our enemies. It was not poetry. It was the nightmare every household feared. And Maldon was no exception. In Francia, the annals record women carried from burning monasteries. In Ireland, mothers torn from their kin. On the rivers of Rus, daughters chained for the markets of the East. The Annals of Xanten describe how even consecrated nuns were dragged out of cloisters, their vows no shield against chains. After raids, the division came quickly. Weapons to warriors. Silver to chieftains. Women parceled out as living spoils. No law questioned it. No voice defended them. They were the weapon that shattered entire communities. Now step into her eyes, the captive woman's. From the moment chains closed around her wrists, her body was no longer her own. In one camp she might be forced into a warrior's tent. In another, bartered for cattle. Or marched for weeks to stand under the sun in a slave market of Constantinople or Baghdad, appraised like livestock. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, who met the Scandinavians on the Volga in 922, wrote with disgust, a slave girl forced into her master's funeral rite plied with drink, violated before a crowd, and killed to follow him into the afterlife. Rare, yes. But the very fact it was possible strips away any illusion. To Norse raiders, women were not human beings. They were trophies. They were proof of triumph. And this trade reached far beyond northern coasts. In Cordoba, caliphs employed entire regiments of Saqaliba slaves brought from the north and east. Men were drilled into soldiers. Women vanished into harems. For the Vikings, People were more valuable than silver because they could be sold again and again, each body turned into profit. Some sources describe extremes that border on the unthinkable. Arab chroniclers mention rare cases of women tied to ship masts, displayed alive as warnings to those on shore. Picture the sight: black sails rising, and on the mast, a body swaying like a grotesque flag of victory. Even if it was rumor alone could terrify a coast into silence. The battlefield after the Vikings was never still. Bodies twitched in the grass, smoke curled upward from broken roofs, and the victors moved with grim efficiency. Their first act was not to tend to the wounded or bury the dead. It was to divide. Men to one side, cut down or shackled. Women and children to another, herded like livestock. The separation was swift, final, and absolute. The Frankish chronicles repeat this pattern again and again. The Annals of Saint Bertin record the year 845, when Paris burned and a monastery was sacked. Every surviving woman was carried off, even consecrated nuns, their vows offering no shield. For the monk who wrote it, this was the wrath of God. For us, it is starker proof: no sanctuary was sacred, not even the walls of Christ. Picture a mother clutching her child's hand, only yesterday safe by the hearth. Now a warrior wrenches the boy from his father's grasp. The child shrieks, reaching back with tiny arms. The father does not fight. He only lowers his head, because he knows, this is the end. Not just farewell to wife and son. Farewell to the world he belonged to. Some chronicles hint that, on rare occasions, captives were permitted one last embrace: a wife holding her husband, a mother clinging to her son. But even that mercy was cruel. That final touch was not hope. It was a sentence. Beyond it lay chains, ships, and futures swallowed by the unknown. Arab markets preserved what the chronicles left unsaid. Children were sometimes branded with hot irons before sale, marked like cattle so traders could track them. A line in a Frankish entry mentions simply, "The daughter of Adalric was taken." No name, no fate, a whole life reduced to a record of property. Archaeology gives these silences a body. In York, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a young woman, traced by DNA to Ireland. She was barely 20. Her spine bent from relentless labor, her teeth worn down by hunger, her joints scarred with strain far beyond her years. For centuries, parchment ignored her. But her bones still speak. The medieval sources return again and again to the same horror: after victory came ritualized sexual violence. It was never just about an individual woman. It was about breaking the spirit of an entire people. Picture the aftermath. The fields still strewn with corpses, the air heavy with smoke. A group of women driven into a dark tent. Outside, drunken laughter, horns blaring, warriors celebrating their triumph. Inside, silence, broken only by muffled sobs. Women crouch in corners, clutching each other's hands. Then footsteps in the dirt. The flap lifts. They know, the night has no escape. The Frankish bishop Prudentius, writing in the 9th century, put it bluntly: the Vikings shamelessly defiled women in front of their loved ones. For the raiders, this was not shame but theater, another act of conquest, a victory played out on the bodies of the defeated. And far away on the Volga, Ibn Fadlan recorded cruelty pushed into ritual. At a chieftain's funeral, a slave girl was plied with drink, assaulted before the crowd, and killed to follow her master into death. It was extraordinary, but it shows that even brutality could become part of ceremony. Slavery was not a byproduct of Viking raids. It was their foundation. Gold could be spent, silver melted down, but people could be taken again and again. And women, above all, were the most valued resource. Arab travelers remarked that Norse traders brought more women to market than any other commodity. In Baghdad or Cordoba, a single captive girl could fetch a fortune. Imagine her standing beneath the sun, shackled, forced to open her mouth while a buyer inspected her teeth. She is not a person. She is a price. Picture the row, chains clinking at their ankles, men circling, prodding shoulders, tilting heads as though assessing livestock. You stand there, eyes lowered, knowing your value has already been written on your body. In Constantinople, Byzantine records describe sales at the great slave market by the harbor, the Torisian, where captives from the north were lined up under imperial supervision. The empire needed labor, and the Vikings supplied it. Archaeology confirms what the chronicles hint. In Sweden, iron collars have been unearthed, their locks still clicking shut when tested by historians. Heavy, crude, sized not for warriors but for women and children, symbols of ownership that, once closed, rarely opened again. Even the law codes stripped away dignity. The Icelandic Gragas ruled that a female thrall could be sold without her consent, no different from a horse or a cow. Excavations across Scandinavia uncover hoards of Arab dirhams, silver coins carried back from the east. They glitter in museum glass today, but in truth they are silent ledgers of how many lives were bartered away. Byzantine sources repeat the refrain, Norse slaves, sold in Constantinople by the thousands. Every coin, every collar, every line of law whispers the same truth. For the Vikings, human trafficking was not shameful. It was more profitable than plunder. Not every captive was sold into distant markets. Some were kept alive for profit. They became hostages, living currency in negotiations, pawns in the politics of jarls. Frankish chronicles describe how Viking leaders demanded ransoms in silver or livestock, holding women as collateral. Refuse, and the captives could be maimed or killed. Agree, and sometimes the hostages were kept for years, their presence a constant reminder that resistance would cost more lives. Imagine the terror of such a life. You sit in the smoky hall of a jarl, surrounded by strangers whose words you do not understand. Every glance feels like a threat. You do not dare to flee, or even to weep too loudly, because any mistake might raise the ransom your family must pay. Some sources hint that hostages could even be disfigured to prevent escape, blinded, or crippled in one leg. Such cruelty turned the body itself into a warning. The sagas preserve the boast, your wives are in our hands. For a jarl, a living hostage was proof of power. For the woman, it was an endless vigil of fear. One chronicle recalls a Frankish girl held for years in a Norse hall. Her name was not preserved. She appears only as the daughter of a dowrick. Not a person, a line in a contract, a reminder scrawled in the margins of power. They were not people. They were leverage. They were guarantees. A hostage's body no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the truce. She was a living shield, trapped in someone else's bargain. And so each day was not a step toward freedom. It was a wait for the next humiliation. The terror of the Vikings grew so vast it became a weapon on its own. Chronicles tell us that cities and monasteries sometimes surrendered without a single clash, undone by nothing more than the rumor of sails on the horizon. Picture the scene. A lone guard on a tower squints into the mist. Slowly, black sails rise like dark wings. No shouting yet, no swords drawn, and already panic spreads. Men glance at their wives, knowing they cannot protect them. Women clutch their children, whispering prayers that this time the ships will pass them by. Some families fled before the first axe was raised, abandoning homes and fields to the wind. In other towns, fear was tallied like a grim account, names scratched in chalk on walls, updated each day as if marking those already lost. People would walk past, see a new line, and understand, another household gone. Many sought refuge in monasteries, trusting the holy walls to shield them. But even sanctuaries burned. For Viking raiders, a cross above the door was no protection, it was simply another marker of wealth inside. Arab writers observed the same, fear itself marched ahead of the Norsemen, doing the work of 100 swords. Gold could be hidden. Stones rebuilt. But the fate of women, that was what made fear unshakable. We celebrate the Vikings in sagas and on screens, bold sailors braving unknown seas, explorers who fought storms and enemies. Their tales sound like adventures, their names turned into symbols of strength. But the sagas leave another story in shadow. Behind every raid, every ransom, every cup raised in victory stood women nameless and unremembered. Wives dragged from burning homes. Daughters torn screaming from their fathers' arms. Mothers ripped away from their children. Archaeology preserves what parchment tried to erase. In York, the bones of Irish girls, no older than 20, bent from labor and malnutrition. In Sweden, iron collars whose locks still snap shut with a sound that chills museum audiences. In Icelandic sagas, women reduced to a single word ambat, thrall, nothing more. No name. No story. Here there's silence. No songs carried their grief. No poets etched their suffering. They vanished into slave caravans, into eastern markets, into the darkness of tents where victory was celebrated on their bodies. The Viking Age is not only a story of daring voyages and swords raised in battle. It is a story of fear that traveled faster than black sails. Fear born of what awaited women once defenses crumbled. Return to the first image, a woman running barefoot across a burning field, a child pressed to her chest, screams rising behind her. That image did not fade with the 9th century. It lingers still, the silence after a scream echoing across centuries. The true cost of Viking victories cannot be tallied in silver or land. Not silver. Not land. Lives erased. So when we retell their saga today, we must remember not only the longships and the warriors, but the thousands of women consigned to silence. Their story endures in bones unearthed, in iron collars rusting in soil, in silver dirhams scattered like ashes of stolen lives. That is the legacy beneath the legend.